Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another LoFi history. It's been a couple of weeks since our last one. We have been very busy here at the History Center. We've had our Chautauqua series. We have had virtual summer camps. We are getting ready for the school year, which is super exciting. But we are excited also to answer your history questions today. If this is your first time joining us, then welcome to LoFi History. This is your opportunity to ask historians Marie and Glen your history questions while I will host. And I did want to mention that we are a little bit late with starting our August donation goal, but we do have our August donation goal, and what's really cool this month, you have the chance to win an 8x10 photograph print from our NC White photography collection. This is a very exciting new exhibit, also one of the things that's kept us quite busy this summer.
Yes.
And you will have your pick from 6 different images. Here are a few of them that you get to pick from. And donations of $5 will enter you into the raffle, and we will announce that at the beginning of September. So you can go to bit.ly/August21goal to enter and help us reach our donation goal, a modest donation goal of $100 for August. So if you can help us reach that, that would be awesome.
That's right. And I do want to say, too, that this is not just something we're running off on a copier here at the History Center. This is an actual, as they say, museum quality print, right, on good paper with super high resolution. It's about as close. And these prints are made from the actual negatives from the collection. So this is kind of a sweet piece, not just a photocopy.
Yes. We were sent paper swatches and then had to decide which paper was the best paper.
It was that fancy.
It was
that
fancy.
And plus the collection is just remarkable. It's stunning imagery. I mean, if we want to go back to just these few pictures, we're only seeing 5 from thousands of photo negatives that we have received and that we are displaying in our special exhibit. So if you're in the area, this is an excellent time to come see not only a local photographer, but a true artist that otherwise may have been lost to time had it not been for a few lucky events and connections that we made. Thanks
Which
to
is all
Leslie.
Told in the gallery.
Yes, we have a little mini documentary on that. I want to say hello to everyone before we dive in. Hello, Elizabeth and Thomas on Facebook. Hello. I see Thomas has our first question, which we will get to. We also have Charlie on YouTube. Hello, Charlie. Oh, yay, Alma is also here. So hello to Alma and Gabby and friends. Wonderful. And I see that Alma says Gabby is back at school, but she has a question for us. So we look forward to Gabby joining us later when she gets to watch this. Yeah. But we always like to start off with what Glen and Marie are wearing. So, Glen, I'm going to start with you today.
Okay.
I think I have an idea of generally what you're wearing.
What gives it away, Libba?
That lovely little, honestly, to me, I would call that like a Popeye hat.
Well, that's what people think of, right? So I am dressed as a U.S. Navy sailor. And if no other service is, the Navy is the home of tradition. Although what I'm wearing is very much the workaday outfit. We think of the Navy wearing those blue jumpers with a little thing on the back, wool top, wool bottom, bell-bottom trousers. That style of dress goes all the way back to the late Napoleonic era, and it's very much traditional. But when you start getting into the mid-20th century, in the 1930s, and especially in World War II, the demands of sailors on combat vessels means that they need to dress a little more comfortably than just wools or those white jumpers and things like that. So some admirals would say, devolve into something very practical. They're wearing what in effect are blue jeans. They are jean trousers. They still keep that bell bottom because that looks cool. And then just a cotton chambray shirt. And however, they keep this hat. This is traditionally called a Dixie Cup Hat. And it is very cool. It's just got that shape to it, right? And you see it immediately, and you know that is a sailor. And this being the working uniform of sailors in the Navy really stretches from the mid-1930s pretty much up until, depending on what ship you're on, today. You know, the materials may be a little more modern and synthetic and a little more comfortable, but that chambray shirt, those jean trousers, this Dixie Cup hat. Sailors everywhere still wear this kind of thing, and I can tell you this, it is very comfortable.
I like it. I think it's cute. I think we should bring it back. Also wanted to say, Calicott on Twitch, thank you so much for that $5 donation.
Yay!
Yay! Our first $5 toward our goal. And Calicott says, if we don't preserve our history, we lose it. Thanks for your work, LoFi History. Thank you, Calicott.
Thank you.
We really appreciate that. And going back to your Dixie Cup hat, I mean, I am curious. It's folded up in such a way that I just want to hide things.
You want? Okay, so
is that a thing that sailors did?
Here is what the hat is supposed to be. They're at sea, right? They need a hat that's going to keep water off. So you can wear it like, think of it as the Gilligan hat, right? It's the Gilligan hat. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it keeps the water from falling off you, but this is not a very dashing military look. So the water's not constantly coming on you, so then you fold it back up and you get this look. However, sailors love to have a little bit of individuality, and they're allowed that much more so than the other services. So each sailor is going to fold his hat a certain way. Remember, everything in the Navy has to fold small because there's limited space on a ship. So this hat folds up this way. Woot, woot.
Oh, look at that.
And it can go in your pocket or in your duffel bag or something like that. But folding it up like that kind of starts giving it that shape. And then you can start curling the top. And you see guys wearing it like way back here. I don't know how they keep it on their head. They'll wear it any way they can. They're allowed to wear this hat even when they're on duty, any way they want, as long as it's on their head.
Very cool. Oh, that's fascinating.
It's very Pops, you're right. We should bring this back.
Yeah, maybe we could have like a sailor fashion program sometime. Navy fashion. All right, now going a bit back in history, we have Marie. So Marie, do describe what you have on today.
So I am wearing an ensemble of an 1850s American European woman. So what makes this a little bit different than 1840s or 1860s is it kind of is like a mesh between the two. This is probably what you would consider late 1840s, early 1850s. I have the nice little flowy sleeve here, which is
fringe.
fun.
Would you call that fringe on the
this is lace.
Lace. Ooh,
lace trim.
Yes.
And it has fun
look at that.
undersleeves.
What?
So that way, when I get, I'm doing something, but I'm not going to be doing much. I'm dressed as like a middling upper sorts lady.
They're arm dickies.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then this is also like a shirt dickie. Right. But it's called a chemisette because I'm fancy.
Ooh, a chemisette.
Yes, a chemisette. So it goes in the back and front. It's basically a dickie. But it goes, I'm going to stand so you can see my fan front bodice here. It's very pretty.
I love that.
Thank you. And then, of course, the little brooch. The sunglasses obviously make the ensemble.
Oh, yes, of course.
And then I'm not wearing any petticoats with it right now, but you would probably, in the 1850s, this is where you start to see the hoop come into fashion, which we so associate with the 1860s, Victoria, American Civil War. Like, that's, people think of the giant bell skirt.
Oh, yeah.
And that is coming into fashion in the 1850s. Predominantly because in the early 1850s, women are wearing so many petticoats that it's like physically hard to move.
Oh no.
Of course, that's like the upper class ladies who have time to, do such things.
They're not supposed to have to move much
Exactly.
anyway.
I see. So a working class woman wouldn't
She is not
wear
she
petticoats.
she would wear a petticoat if she had one.
Okay.
Because that provides warmth.
Oh, right.
And it provides, not trying to get your skirt caught in your legs. You're going to wear a corded petticoat just because it's easier to move when wearing a corded petticoat and it's warmer.
Okay.
So you're going to have a petticoat, but you're not going to try to make your dress as full as possible wearing multiple petticoats.
That's like a fashion statement.
It
you
is.
Make.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, is it mostly just to say, look at how many petticoats I can afford?
Yes.
Nice.
Pretty much. It's a fashion thing. It's like, look how much fabric I can have.
Yeah.
But then someone finds a hoop because hoops had been popular in the 1500s, 1600s.
Oh, interesting.
And then you have the panniers and the grand panniers in the 1700s. So someone kind of like brings them back, really.
Cool.
It's like been gone for like a couple hundred years, and people are like, you know what? We can make it poofy and move easier.
Yes, there you go.
Yay!
Nice.
Because that's when you have dress reform starting. There's a whole dress reform movement where they're wearing bluer pants and kind of like this long coat. Amelia Bloomer popularizes it, but does not come up with it. And it's a whole movement basically saying, like, our dresses are killing us. Like, what are we doing? Why are we wearing these things?
Wow.
Well, and you pointed out something, too, that I think we can't hammer home too much, is that pretty much all fashion before, a little bit after 1900, but especially before 1900, going all the way back, is basically based on the fact there's no central heating or air in buildings, right?
Yeah,
and you've got a huge amount of, change in climate and cold winters.
You have the Little Ice Age in the 1600s, which, I mean, that influenced fashion, but a whole other things, but fashion too.
They're still going to look fancy, but every bit of clothing, even the crazy fancy stuff, has to be practical on a certain level. Yes. Everything does.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating. Awesome. Well, we've already got some questions, so we're going to start off with Thomas. Hello, Thomas!
Hey.
In Kentucky. And Thomas says, so Thomas is playing with old G.I. Joe figurines and wants to know all about tanks. Now, I think we all know who's ready for this question, Glenn.
All about tanks.
All about tanks. Now, specifically wants to know, are there any good stories surrounding tanks? Or, Glenn, do you have favorite tanks? And I am ready to Google when you are.
Yes and yes. So, wait, I'll have to ask first. You're saying G.I. Joe figurines. Are you talking the 1980s 3 3/4 inch ones, or the old school 1960s full, like 16-inch figures?
I would assume the smaller ones, just because that's what I'm more familiar with. Oh, thank you so much, Wheeless Studios, for the host.
Oh, thank you.
We appreciate that.
But yeah, well, let us know about that.
Yes,
but,
let us know.
So tanks,
Sorry.
That's okay.
Wrong button.
Let me sum up. Tanks began in World War I as a mechanical way to overcome the huge fields of barbed wire that the soldiers had to get through so that they could attack. They were secretly called water tanks so that the enemy wouldn't know what they were. The British are really the ones who spearheaded this effort. The French kind of helped. The Germans purposely decided not to pursue it because they were putting their resources towards making bigger things elsewhere, predominantly submarines, which is a whole other story. But the tanks were mechanically unreliable, but when they did work, they made a huge difference, right? And these are the ones, some of my personal favorites are these British World War I tanks, the Mark IV, male and female, that have the treads that go all the way around. And the male one had a small artillery piece in the side, and the female tanks had a whole bunch of machine guns so that when they went over the trench, the guys with a machine gun could look down into the trench and just machine gun everything. Yes, that's it. That is a Mark. Let's see. Yes, that's a Mark IV. No, that's a Mark I. That's a Mark I, but it's the same thing. The look is the same, and you see those side sponsons, those things that poke out the side are called sponsons, and they have artillery pieces. Some of them would have machine guns. That dangly piece of wood on the front is basically to help it get out of trenches and cross over things if it needed to. This is the very first beginning of tanks. Where is that from? The American or British Tank Museum?
Let's see. It's from Google as of right now. the Tank Museum. That
must be the one at Bovington in England. So that is an original. That is a Mark IV male, and that little bundle on top, they would carry those, put them and cut them loose, put them into the trenches so it would have something to go on. These moved slow as the soldiers would walk on purpose because they were supposed to stay with the soldiers. You get to World War II, and the tanks are much more heavily armed. They're more mechanically reliable. They move much faster, and they sort of define the tactics. And you get to, like an American Sherman tank, you get to a British Panther tank. These tanks have a pivoting turret on top, which you notice the Mark I's and IVs didn't, so that they can move that main gun and aim it at different targets regardless of what direction the tank was heading. The American tanks were much more technologically and mechanically reliable. They were not as big because we had to ship them all 3,000 miles across the ocean. Thank you. Yes, that is a Sherman tank. I think that's an M4A1 or 2. You can tell by the cast hull for you tank nerds out there. But you notice the gun looks big to us, but when you start looking at some of the bigger guns that were mounted on the Soviet and German tanks, it's not that big. And I will tell you one really cool story. There's a ton of cool stories about tanks. And I haven't even gotten past World War II, but we're going to save it for the next time. But this should give you a taste for it, right? There's an interview with a World War II German tank commander. And you could tell he had seen some action. He had like a scar on his face, but he had moved to America after the war because he thought America was great and he's living here, but they were interviewing him. And I'm going to do my bad German accent again.
Awesome.
And he's talking about, the German tanks were always better. We had the bigger guns. We were mechanically better. Our sights were better. And every one of our tanks was worth 10 of yours. The problem was you always had 11 of them. And so the Germans could not make tanks in massive numbers the way the Allies could. Again, especially the Americans and the Soviets. And his proportions are not far off, right? The Germans were making maybe 1 or 2 tanks for every 10 that the Americans and the Soviets were making. Even though they weren't as big, the guns weren't as big, there were just so many of them, right? That it was hard for Germany to overcome that battle of attrition with numbers.
Right.
So,
right.
But tanks are really fascinating. They still use them today. The anti-tank weapon has developed along with the tank. In World War I, they were just gigantic rifles. But today you have guided missiles and laser sights with silent bombs that can come from the sky and kill them. They don't even know they're coming. So it's very, very interesting, the development of the tank and the development of things to deal with tanks.
Right. That sounds like a great program idea. Thank you, Thomas. That was an excellent
Thanks
question.
for that question.
Thanks for the question. Tanks. Oh, well. Alma says, so excited. I forgot it was Tuesday. I'm having a crazy day, and being able to watch you guys is going to help so much. Oh,
yay.
That makes us feel so good. Gabby is back at school, but her current show is Matilda. Now, the musical, I assume. Since there isn't a historical show, my question will be about schools. When did public schools, as we think of, come into existence? That's an excellent question. So, who wants to take it away? The dawn of public education in America.
Oh, that's a hard one to put your finger on it exactly, because I know, are we talking about public school like public land-grant universities? Are we talking public school like, elementary school? When did we start sending our kids off to kindergarten?
Let's talk about maybe when did a schoolhouse that children in the community went to the centralized, this is the schoolhouse, like when did that start in America, or was that already, is there a precedent for that?
In America, that started fairly early, not as a government operation, but as a community operation. So, and it was usually only in, I was about to say urban. Let's say populated areas.
Right.
Yes. Because you can have a schoolhouse out in the middle of, farm country, but
or
you
nowhere.
have a community that is still using it.
Yeah.
So what would happen is the community would come together to find a central building, which was also usually the church, because they wouldn't need the church during the week. They wouldn't need school during the weekend. And people who wanted their children to go to this school would basically pay a subscription. And then there was a school board formed, and they would hire a teacher that would come in, and they would take that subscription money and pay the teacher for everyone. It varied how long it went, because we're still very much rural and predominantly agricultural, so these kids are going to have to be out there working on the farms too. That's the first public school, again, not necessarily government, but community based. In the north and truly urban areas, it began to pick up later. In the south, it was very, very slow to take root. Part of that was because of slavery. There obviously was no education for the enslaved whatsoever. Let me rephrase that. There was no formal education for the enslaved whatsoever. Sometimes they might get a trade or something like that. But the same thing for free white folks. They wouldn't, education wasn't necessarily scorned, but it was considered unnecessary throughout much of the South. And in the North, it was a different story until after the Civil War, in which case those who became, especially the recently enslaved, those who could go to school and get an education, often provided by funding from like the Freedmen's Bureau and things like that. I want to say that attendance rates early on during Reconstruction at African American schools were in the 90% of people who were eligible to go went. So
wow, you know, I did find I found the oldest wooden schoolhouse is in St. Augustine, Florida, which at first kind of surprised me, but then thinking about it, it doesn't, because Florida has quite
the Spanish.
An old history.
St. Augustine does claim to be one of the oldest cities in America. Sometimes they claim to be the oldest. They have a whole battle with some other old cities to be who is the oldest. But
the oldest city with European founders.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And this schoolhouse was built in the early 1700s with the first tax record of it being 1716. I mean, that's really old for America.
Wow, yeah.
So here's a picture of it. So it looks like you can still visit it to this day, which is pretty neat. So, you know, I think this speaks to what you were saying. It's not, you know, run by a government or any kind of centralized system, but it's a community effort that it makes me wonder about the youngest people in that time of our American history and what their experiences may have been like to live in not pre-colonial, but colonial, very early Florida.
Right. And the people that are going to go to school are not going to be probably any younger than 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And up to that point, it was usually the role of the mother to provide the whatever education those kids were going to get.
Yeah. And so we do have, when does public education, maybe you addressed this as why I was researching, but when does all right, we have a public school system
like across the board, more or less?
Right. Is that early 1900s or?
Super late 1800s in the more urban areas, and by the time you get to the early 1900s, it's pretty much universal.
Awesome.
But there's no larger oversight than at the state level, if that. Right? Remember, there wasn't a Secretary of Education under the American presidency until the 1970s.
Wow, that's much later than I would have expected.
Yeah. So it was very much state controlled, and not control's not quite the right word.
Mm-hmm.
Guided. Yeah, I mean, guidance and
standards
and expectations were set partially at the state level, but it was really, really centered in the local, about the county level.
Yeah,
is where most of your leadership went into public schools.
And I see Karen has a related question. Did most schools teach information that related to their areas? I wonder maybe we could more broadly answer that as to what type of curriculum would be taught, at a one-room schoolhouse era of education.
Right.
That's going to be more of it depends on which era we're talking about, but the one I'm going to focus on is more like that late 1800s when we're starting to see there is a one-room schoolhouse, and most communities want to have one of these and do it. And that's going to be your reading, writing, arithmetic, and you're going to try to teach people the alphabet. You're going to try to teach people how to read. They're going to learn how to write at least their own name, and to do basic addition and subtraction, and applying that to their lives, which is I want to buy this. I need to make sure that I can count out the money and then write my name on the receipt in the most basic form, because when you have that community, you have trade, you want to be able to have writing so that you can document that trade. That goes back to early
Mm-hmm.
civilization, is that kind of goes together, and continues into that era when we were trying to teach what are the basics. Now if you're trying to say are they teaching agricultural skills, farming skills, that's something that you're going to learn on the job at your family's farm.
Right.
That's not something that the school is going to teach you.
Yeah.
Now, as we move into modern education, today, I can tell you that there are still definitely schools that are more in rural settings are going to have classes about how to hitch your tractor up to the, the different systems that you have, different harvesting systems that urban city schools are not going to have, because you don't have space, and perhaps because it is not necessarily pertinent to their lives as much.
Right.
But back in the olden one-room schoolhouse days, you're going to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic if you are lucky, and you're going to, the youngest kids sit up front and the oldest kids sit in the back, and then you move your way down the benches until you're out.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
Yeah.
They got probably zero science. They might have gotten a little bit of U.S. history. A very little bit. But, that's the point of an education, right? Is to produce citizens who can function as productive members of society. And in less complex societies, that requires a little bit less of what we think of as formal education. Now we live in a society so complex. We assume, we work under the operating basis that it takes 12 years to get someone ready to basically enter society as an adult.
Right, yeah. And I see that...
But sometimes I think 12 years is too much. Sometimes I think it's not remotely enough.
Depends on who's being taught what.
And what they're being taught, yeah.
Terry on Facebook says, my second grade teacher taught my dad in a one-room schoolhouse. I'm old. You're just an antique. That's
vintage.
Elizabeth on Facebook says, I can't imagine the lice outbreaks they must have had. That is a good point. I mean, there are going to be challenges that we don't really, of course, this happens in school systems as well, but something like a lice outbreak or sickness, going around could really be so much more of a challenge. The stakes are so much higher. And Alma also says, my great-grandmother in Ohio went to a public school about 1850, and it was both in German and English. Gabby is in dual immersion Spanish-English school, and everyone thinks of it as a new thing, but her great-great-grandmother did it too. Oh, that's a neat connection. Yeah. Now we're going to, I also see Karen is here. Hello, Karen. Good to see you. And I see that Tim Kyle is here.
Oh, dear.
Karen, I'm so sorry. We missed your question about, let's go back to tanks for just a second. Karen asks, how did they survive the heat inside the tanks? That's a very good question.
That is an excellent question, and sometimes they didn't. Those very first tanks, the reasons they're so bulky is because the engine sits in the middle of that box. Oof. And there's not much to protect you from the engine inside. If you might can find a picture of this. I've gotten to see some of these really old World War I tanks, and they're both fascinating and horrifically frightening because the engine's just right there in the middle of the box, going chuck, 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 and the noise and the oil and the gas fumes. It does exhaust out the back, so there's at least that. But it is hot and it is loud, and sometimes they didn't. That's the thing. There are plenty of accounts of guys just passing out from heat, passing out from lack of breathable air. They would have to open doors to try to get air flowing through. That's another reason. They're not only mechanically unreliable, but they're so uncomfortable that it's awful to serve in them. That Mark IV tank, I want to say it had a crew of, depending upon what kind of gun you've got, about 8 to 10 people inside that box with the engine and the guns all going at once.
I'm trying to find an interior of, let's see, I have a British tank interior. Let me see if this is gonna help out at all. Is that
that's okay, that's it. So the part to the left of the screen is, the part to the right of the screen is the front of the tank. It moves in that direction, and so you can see the engine is right behind the driver and the commander. And all the mechanics, the manifolds, the exhaust goes out the top, it's all right there, and they're having to move basically around the engine to go from one side of the tank to the other to man the guns, to get the ammunition. They were very, very cramped. They were not remotely built for comfort.
Yeah, it does not look that way. All right, thank you, Karen. That was an excellent question. So Connor on YouTube wants to know if there were any blind sailors. So maybe you could talk to us about more generally, could someone serve if they were blind, if they wanted to serve in the Navy or even the Army in any kind of capacity? What would be their options?
Generally not. If you go back to the traditional days, say the peak of the sail and wooden ship Navy, sailors could get injured in the line of duty, and they would receive sort of like a bounty for the injuries that they would get. They might get a pension, and sometimes if the injury was like they had lost an arm or they had lost a leg, they could still be kept on as a cook or an assistant cook or something like that. But blindness pretty much made it impossible to perform any task aboard ship whatsoever. So it was countries until very, very recently have not taken very good care of their disabled veterans. And so, that person would be treated, kept alive, set ashore, and said, "We're sorry, thank you for your service to the King / the United States. Be sure and show up at the office to get your relatively modest pension every month, and we'll see ya." And that was it. So, there were some disabled sailors who could get jobs aboard ship, but a blind sailor, there's no way, I don't think.
Gotcha.
I cannot think of a single instance where they served, continued to serve.
Yeah. Oh, interesting question though. And we also have another question from this is from Tim on YouTube. In what ways did ideas and values held by the Puritans influence the political, economic, and social development of New England colonies from 1630 to 1660? Is that your thesis, Tim?
That's very specific.
What a great question.
But it is a really good question. Let's talk about Puritan influence in early colonial America. Let's talk about... I'm curious about the social development because I feel like that touches political and economic. So,
well, remember they're coming from England where there is no separation between church and state whatsoever. Number one, they're used to that. That's why they've left, is because they have come to America as religious and therefore political dissidents. So that's why they came here in the first place, so that they could practice their religion in their own way. As a result, most of those original governing bodies of New England and the Puritan areas were in effect the church leaders as well. So this is the Salem witch trial thing, right?
Yeah, so the church leaders are also your political leaders, but also they kind of wanted separation of church and state, but not for them because they wanted to make a city on the hill, which was a moral, church-run society, more or less. But they didn't want, the big government telling them what to do, necessarily.
Right. But they carried over some of that from England, from the different parishes and churches having bodies that could govern themselves. And when they got to the New World, they took that a step further, and instead of just governing the church and the parish, they governed the political body, right? The part of land that particular community was centered on and controlled. And as a result, that set very, very deeply the seeds of local self-government in terms of citizens taking part in the governance process. So your question is very relevant, of course, and you probably knew that when you asked it, but that idea of all male parishioners taking part in the church as well as the political body set the standard for what in New England at least became representative government. And as that continued to evolve, even after the Puritans sort of began to lose a little bit of control to more secular powers in New England, especially, say, for example, Massachusetts, that central core of self-government based on citizens taking part very directly in the governing process stuck so hard that when you get to the 1750s and 60s, it's that New England bunch that starts to rail so strongly against a central figurehead like the governor of Massachusetts or the king or something like that. That's why they feel their rights were being usurped, is because this tradition they had for over 100 years had settled so deeply that they were very, very jealous of the way they had been doing things.
I go back even to the Mayflower Compact, which is sometimes pointed to as a document that, that started self-government in America. Now, that was with, the Pilgrims. Now, not all Pilgrims were Puritans, but there were also Puritans who were Pilgrims. It's kind of like a thumb and finger situation. So, there were Pilgrims who were on the Mayflower who just wanted to come for economic opportunities, and then there were people who were Puritans who were also Pilgrims who wanted to come and start that city on the hill to have, basically almost like a religious refugee almost.
Right.
Come and set up their own society where they can practice what they want to do as they want to do it. And all of them kind of had to come together and agree on the Mayflower of like, hey, how are we going to govern ourselves? Because there were people who wanted to just, exploit the land and make it rich. And then there were people who wanted to come and settle there and try to have families in a community. And they're like, we have to get along somehow. Mayflower Compact. Self-government.
Yep. So that's how the Puritan religion in the early 1600s began to develop the entire political situation in New England.
The Puritans have, to go back to our educational question that we had a little bit earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Puritans also stressed the importance of reading the Bible for yourself, and therefore they wanted everyone to be literate so that they could read and study the Bible, having an emphasis on education and especially on literacy.
Right. You can interpret the Bible how you want, but you had better come to the right conclusions.
I see, right?
Anne Hutchinson, who was one of the few, women leaders. Well, she attempted to be a woman leader and then got run out of town and I think died in the snow.
Oh,
but
dear.
She, was one of those people who was challenging. She had her own interpretations of scripture and no one liked, certain leaders did not like them.
Yes.
And told her to be quiet and to leave.
That's fascinating, though. I don't think I knew much about her. We'll have to
She
dive
also
into
published some writings.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna write down Anne Hutchinson. Hutchinson. Okay, we'll look her up later and maybe do a little bit of a dive into that. All right, cool. Excellent question, Tim. Thank you so much. Our next question comes from Charlie on YouTube. Oh, this is a good one. When did the concept of a capital city begin?
At the beginning.
When there were cities.
Yeah.
As soon as there were cities. I'm working on our lessons plans for world history, so this is something that I have very much just been studying.
Eyeball deep in.
Yes. And when you have the early civilizations of Mesopotamia and the cradle of civilization between the Tigris and Euphrates River, you have Sumeria, you have Babylonia, and you have Acadia, and particularly Sumeria is usually the one that's kind of like the oldest, and it was a nation made up of city-states, and of course in every city-state they kind of had their center of trade, which was they had a ziggurat that was kind of like the center of the city, but then of course there were also city centers. They're bigger, smaller ones, but it starts there.
Yeah, because the you don't have a the way civilization starts. You don't have a territory, and then everyone in the territory decides to build a city where the capital will be. The storage area for all the agricultural produce, where that produce is traded for goods and services. Where the stratification of society begins to create ruling classes, priest classes, worker classes, that all happens in the city. And so that the civilization, the different city-states spread out from the city, not reverse. And that, that continues from the ancient times. Now, because of that and because of where cities spring up, localism takes over, and then as things begin to get bigger and bigger and you start to have larger kingdoms and empires and different forms of fealty from one city to the other, like the Athenian Empire, for example, then basically the strongest city becomes the capital of whatever empire you're talking about. But there always needs to be a center of political power. Even if that's good political power or bad political power or neutral political power, there has to be some place where that happens, and that becomes the capital city.
Very cool. Very cool. And speaking of world history, Elizabeth on Facebook says, yay, Thomas's sister will be in world history. Yes.
Yay.
If y'all are unfamiliar, we have an excellent course called Homeschool Connection, and we are offering a world history course this semester. So it's going to be fall and spring. So really diving into the details of world history with Marie. So that's going to be super exciting. If you have students, then you can let us know if you are, let's see, we generally take 3rd to 8th grade, but if you feel like, your homeschool student is ready for to dive into world history, just let us know. And more information is on our website about homeschool history. Or Homeschool Connection, goodness. Although that sounds fun.
There's a lot of history in there.
There's a lot of history in there.
It's all about history.
Yes. So going back to education, Elizabeth asks, as educators, is it normal that young kids don't have history or social studies in lower grades? We are so thankful for you all because Thomas is in 2nd and hasn't had much of any instruction at school in this area. Is this average? And I mean, given that we go according to the Georgia Standards of Excellence, I can say that, I mean, children are introduced to people and big concepts, but it's really not until 2nd, 3rd grade that
the early stuff tends to focus, it seems, on biography rather than history.
Right. So, I mean, that's another big reason of why we create webisodes like our hands-on history, which are cute puppets that, entertain the young ones, but also give them those big concepts and introduce them. So you can see those on our YouTube channel. But generally, Marie, have you gotten a sense of Georgia education as far as when they start really diving into the history, the timeline, the facts, the dates?
Yes. So in the younger grades, you have what's called social studies, more or less. And in kindergarten, there's really not a lot of history. I think they get introduced to George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, and that's kind of it. And then they talk about holidays, and there's a lot of history that goes into certain holidays, but they're not being taught, in 1811, this is when this happened. And then in 1st grade, you get introduced to Thomas Jefferson and the writing of the Declaration of Independence. And then kind of tying that into what they already know about the 4th of July and things like that. And then in 2nd grade, that's when you start, I believe, basically you start American history. And a lot of that is focused on more the colonial era of American history. So the founding of the American colonies. And then it kind of goes through, you go through the timeline, and you go through American history through, founding of America to now. And then in middle school, you generally get world history, and then you kind of repeat those throughout high school in a more in-depth way.
And, that's the trick, is that it'll come as no surprise to most of you that we think history is incredibly complex, right? It's so complex, there are days I wake up and I feel like I don't understand any of it. I mean, really, there's so many things to learn and to take into account and understand. And so getting the 2nd graders in, you face the challenge of making it relatable to a 2nd grader without making it a lie, if that makes any sense.
Right.
You can simplify something to the point where it's not factual or not the truth. Not that you're purposely misleading them, but the course of human events is very complex. And so you've got to get a little bit of mental complexity in those little elementary school brains before you can start hitting, what were the founding ideas of the United States, and how did we get to a constitutional republic as opposed to a monarchy?
Right. But I think that's the cool thing about our webcasts. So when younger kids get to, for instance, for our youngest grades that we'll do a webcast for, it's typically like Benjamin Franklin. You get to meet Benjamin Franklin as a first grader and talk about all of these inventions and kind of put the concept in their head that, wow, there are conveniences and things that we have now that they didn't have then, and it takes science and ingenuity and thinking to create these things. So, you know, we really do, you have to start with some big building blocks, but I think the most important thing is just to get them interested in the past and in the very early stages, and I think that's what our webcasts and webisodes and things like this hopefully do.
We do a good job.
Yeah. Now, Debbie asks, is the world history homeschool class only for Georgia schooling, or does it qualify in other states? The really cool thing is that it is national. So we have students from all over the country. Most of them are in the eastern part of just because it's our time zone, but we record all of the lessons as well. We have not started, those start in September. I assume we could still accept students at this point.
Yes,
so we don't start. Yeah, we don't start until September. So let me actually go ahead.
We have orientation the last Tuesday of not October. Dear goodness. August. August.
I'll put the link in the Facebook chat for our Homeschool Connection class. And if you know anyone that'd be interested, right now we are offering our world history. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. And very excited about that. Yeah. All right, we are going to have to end a little bit early today, so we'll take one more question. Let's see. Oh, Elizabeth, going back to the question about education, says, I feel better. I thought Kentucky was just super behind, but he can forge ahead on his own. That's right. So our last question for today comes from Josh. Hello, Josh.
Hey.
Ooh, and we have, of course, with Josh, we always have a what if? So, Josh asks, what if Theodore Roosevelt, let's go back to this, let's see, what if Theodore Roosevelt won a third term in 1912? What would he do about Europe during World War I? So what's your best guess as to Theodore Roosevelt's policies about Europe and World War I?
Wow.
That's a good what if.
That's a really good one, Josh.
Is.
I think we would have been in much quicker, the United States.
That was my exact thought process.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which side it would have been on.
Oh, yeah?
Probably.
So you could see an argument on Theodore Roosevelt's side wait, this is World War I. So aligning ourselves with...
Well, he was not fond of Great Britain.
I see.
He was one of the things about Theodore Roosevelt is that as he was Secretary of the Navy for a while and then as president with the Great White Fleet, he was a strong proponent of naval power. Very strong proponent of American naval power, and who had the biggest navy that he thought might pose the biggest threat to America. Not Germany, it was Great Britain.
Right.
Now, that being said, he wasn't, just de facto hostile to Great Britain just because they were Great Britain. But I think, I don't know. I do think he would have wanted to bring America to bear quicker because he was also very interested. This is the interesting thing about Theodore Roosevelt. He's a super progressive, right? But he's also very... militaristic, maybe that's the word. He's a little aggressive with America's foreign policy and military.
He liked to get involved in things.
He did.
He thought America needed to be involved with anything going on.
Yes, and to exert its newfound power.
I see.
He probably would have joined the Allies, quite frankly, but it would have been a close run thing.
Yeah.
I feel like it would probably, because we always say, the Lusitania is one of the reasons, but America didn't get involved in for a couple years after the sinking of Lusitania. Roosevelt probably would have used that as a we need to get in now situation.
Now.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was like, here's a reason, here's a justification.
If he had been in and the Zimmerman telegram had come through.
Yeah.
He would not have said, we must join the great powers against Germany. He would have turned everything around and went into Mexico so fast your head would spin. That's what he would have done.
Ooh,
I bet.
so it could have been totally different.
Now, he
trajectory.
probably still would have declared war on the Central Powers, but the first thing he would have done is gone into Mexico as a potential belligerent.
I see.
Right.
Wow.
And if you don't know what the Zimmerman telegram is, something for you to look up before next time.
Yes, I'll add that. Well, thank you, everyone. I did want to, thank you for the compliments in the chat. You guys are doing a fantastic job.
Thanks.
You're doing amazing. You're great. Aww. Thank you. And hello, Bobble. I see Bobble, one of our fun Twitch fans is back. I hope you were enjoying the show. We do have to head out. I wanted to remind everybody of our raffle one more time. So if you can help us get to our $100 donation goal this month, you can win an 8x10 print of one of these fantastic photos, your choice. And they're only $5 per raffle ticket. So the more that you donate, the more chances you have to win. And we'll be announcing the winner on September 1st. So just go to bit.ly/August21goal. All right, everyone. We will see you very soon. So not next Tuesday, but the next.
Right.
And we hope that we'll see you in we have our last of our August reruns every Wednesday at 2 p.m. This week we have our rerun of a really awesome live stream about Louisa May Alcott with Marie hosting. And that's, of course, the author of Little Women. And she led a fascinating life, and you get to learn all of the biographical information about her life that influenced Little Women. So I hope you'll join us this Wednesday at 2 p.m. on Facebook and YouTube for that. And of course, if you're not a member of the History Center yet, I'll put a link in the chat because we have members live streams every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. This Friday, we are going to learn about the life and career of Amelia Earhart. So I'm really looking forward to that.
That one will just fly by.
And with that, bye, everybody.